President Trump has made it clear that his policies are about putting America first, and that includes foreign policy, something that his new Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has made clear. Now, my next guest says that America first does not have to mean everyone else last. A pro-faith, pro-family, pro-freedom America benefits the entire world. Joining me now to discuss this, Dr. A.J. Nolte, Chair of the Government Graduate Program and Director of the International Development Master's Program at Regent University, is also the Director of the Institute for Israel Studies at Regent University. Dr. Nolte, welcome back to Washington Watch. Thanks so much for joining us.
Tony, thanks as always for having me.
All right, let's talk about, since I think you know this, because every time I have you on, we're talking foreign policy. I think it's very important for Christians to be informed and engaged in foreign policy. And you agree, because you've just written a piece that suggests there are 10 areas that Christian conservatives in this moment need to lean in to help shape the foreign policy of the Trump administration while we have the opportunity. Talk about it.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you for featuring it. The piece is called Faith, Family, and Freedom Beyond the Water's Edge. And it's 10 policy recommendations for how social conservatives can use the opportunity we have of allies within the Trump administration, not least President Trump himself, to advance some very important foreign policy goals. And so I break it up into issues of religious freedom, issues of, which of course focuses on religious persecution and Christians, support for Israel, and some pro-family policies that the United States can also pursue. And then, of course, long-term Christian values of promoting humanitarian aid, which is so often delivered by faith-based organizations. And so in those four areas, there's a number of policy recommendations I've laid out for areas where we can try to advance our traditional, socially conservative Christian foreign policy priorities.
Let's talk about one for just a moment, because I was just talking with Congressman Keith Self. We were talking about a number of these executive orders, how Congress needs to codify those into law. And one of those is one that you write about, that every time you have a Democratic administration, they do away with it. Every time you have a Republican administration, there's advocates like us saying, hey, please reinstate it. And that's the Mexico City policy. Explain what it is and why it's important that that become law.
The Mexico City policy, very simply put, is a basic commitment from the United States government that U.S. taxpayer dollars will not be used to fund abortions abroad. It's not prohibiting health care for vulnerable women who are pregnant. It's prohibiting abortions, right? And so the idea is that with this policy, the United States taxpayers, you and I, our dollars will not be used to pay for abortions in other countries. And unfortunately, the U.S. doesn't have the best history. Oftentimes, in the 60s and 70s, there was an ideology of population control that said the problem with global development is that there's too many people. And as Christians, we know every human being has human dignity, and we know that's not right. And so the Mexico City policy reverses that and says, we're not going to use our taxpayer dollars to get rid of unborn babies in other countries. And I would say, yes, it needs to be made permanent. It needs to be put into law in the same way the Hyde Amendment is domestically. And, let's dare the Democrats to say that it is in the national security interest of the United States to pay for abortions in foreign countries using taxpayer dollars.
Well, related to that, one of your other recommendations is that in our foreign policy, we actually promote the idea that children are good. Having babies are good, because we are facing many countries. Now, Africa may be the only one that is somewhat on a different trajectory, but we're moving toward a demographic winter when you look at our reproduction rates around the world.
Absolutely. There were two driving policy frames that kind of have distorted foreign aid policy often in the past. One is this idea that there's too many people in the world, and and also that overpopulation causes underdevelopment. And now what we're finding actually is, as economists like Julian Simon have known for decades, people are the ultimate resource, and population growth ultimately economic growth and even better environmental conditions, as some demographers and economists have demonstrated. And also, population is declining globally. So instead of having an idea that more children are the problem, I think we need to think about more children as a solution to the problem and as a positive, and look at our ally Israel, which has been very successful in terms of their demographics.
Dr. Nolte, at its core, is that not a humanist worldview conflicting with a biblically oriented worldview? when you look at life
Absolutely.
and the fact that we see life, children taking as opposed to giving?
Yes, absolutely. I think, from that perspective, that utilitarian or humanist perspective, it's a question of how many mouths we can feed, and we worry about quality of life. We, from a Christian perspective, start from a sanctity of life, and we believe that if you start from a sanctity of life perspective, that promotes human flourishing and actually gets you quality of life. And so it's a fundamental worldview difference, and it's time to recalibrate the U.S. government's view on that.
Let's talk. We just got a couple minutes left, but you mentioned foreign aid. USAID is kind of the agency that helps humanitarian efforts around the world. This has been a place that you've actually teamed up with Family Research Council. We've done some research on that's been hostile toward faith-based organizations. It's time to change that.
I agree. And my colleague Ariel Del Turco, who's in your Religious Freedom Center, Regent grad as well, she and I did a report looking at promotion of religious freedom through international development. Again, U.S. foreign aid is actually pennies on the dollar in terms of in increasing our influence, but we need to be smart about it. And the people that are the most efficient at providing global aid are faith-based organizations, and we have to absolutely mobilize them and give them a seat at the table in terms of foreign aid, and also think about religious freedom as not just a human right, but also something that promotes security, stability, and human flourishing around the world.
Well, there's evidence, abundance of evidence that says that is the case. Where you have religious freedom, you have economic prosperity, and you have social stability. So we have, going back almost 25 years, made that a priority, at least in most administrations, and we're out of time here, but you point out something that's very important that we've got to address, and this is the conflict with the LGBTQ agenda and religious freedom, and that is what has moved the Democratic Party away from the holistic approach to religious freedom. Again, Dr. Nolte, we're out of time. Great piece. It's at TonyPerkins.com, folks. You can check it out. Dr. Nolte, look forward to talking to you again real soon.
Thank you so much.